At 34 years old, after spending my entire adult life working as an executive assistant at one of the most prestigious law firms in Manhattan, I never imagined that one wrong turn at a charity gala would completely transform my existence. My name is Eleanor Price, and this is the story of how I accidentally walked through the wrong door at the wrong time and discovered a world I was never supposed to see. That Saturday evening started like any other work event for me. I was wearing a borrowed black dress from my roommate Carla because I could never afford the kind of gowns the wealthy women at these events wore. The fabric was slightly too tight around my waist and the zipper kept digging into my back, but from a distance I looked presentable enough to blend in with the crowd. My boss, Martin Ashford, had demanded I attend the Sinclair Foundation Gala at the historic Kensington estate to take notes on potential clients and make sure he had everything he needed throughout the evening. He was one of the senior partners at the firm, and he treated me like I was invisible most of the time, unless he needed something done immediately. Then suddenly, I became the most important person in his world for about 30 seconds before I disappeared again. The Kensington estate was breathtaking. I had seen pictures online when I was researching the event, but nothing prepared me for the actual experience of walking through those enormous iron gates. The driveway alone was longer than the entire block where I grew up in Brooklyn. Marble fountains lit up with golden lights lined the path, and the mansion itself looked like something out of a European fairy tale. I counted at least 50 windows just on the front face of the building, each one glowing with warm light from crystal chandeliers inside. When I stepped through the main entrance, a man in a tuxedo took my coat and handed me a numbered ticket without even looking at my face. I was used to that. People like me, the assistants, the helpers, the ones who made everything run smoothly behind the scenes, we were designed to be invisible. That was our job. The ballroom was already filled with hundreds of guests when I arrived. Women in designer gowns that probably cost more than my annual salary floated across the marble floor like they were born to be there. Men in perfectly tailored suits laughed too loudly at jokes that probably were not funny, their gold watches catching the light every time they raised their champagne glasses. I spotted Martin near the bar, surrounded by a group of older men who all looked like they owned small countries. He saw me and gave a tiny nod, which was his way of acknowledging my existence without actually having to speak to me in front of important people. I understood my assignment: stay close enough to be available, but far enough away to be invisible. For the first 2 hours, everything went exactly as expected. I stood near the wall with my small notebook, jotting down names whenever Martin glanced at someone he wanted me to research later. I watched the silent auction happening in the corner, where people casually bid $40,000 on a painting like they were buying groceries. I observed the social dynamics, who talked to who avoided who seemed genuinely happy versus who was performing happiness for the crowd. It was around 9:30 when everything changed. Martin had been drinking more than usual, which made him louder and more demanding. He suddenly decided he needed his reading glasses, which he had left in the coat check area, but he could not remember the number on his ticket. He shoved the task onto me with a wave of his hand, telling me to figure it out and bring them to him in 15 minutes because he was about to give a speech. I hurried out of the ballroom and into the vast hallway looking for the coat check station. The Kensington estate was massive, and the hallways all looked identical with their dark wood paneling and oil paintings of stern-looking people from centuries past. I turned left when I should have turned right, then I turned right when I should have gone straight. Within minutes, I was completely lost in a part of the mansion that was clearly not meant for guests. The carpet changed from the plush red of the public areas to a simpler gray, and the lighting became dimmer, more utilitarian. I could still hear the distant murmur of the party, but it sounded like it was coming from a different world. I tried several doors, hoping to find a staff member who could point me in the right direction. The first 3 were locked. The 4th opened into what looked like a storage room filled with cleaning supplies. The 5th door was different. It was heavier than the others, made of dark oak with an ornate brass handle, and it was slightly ajar, with a sliver of golden light spilling out into the hallway. I pushed it open without thinking, expecting to find a servant's quarters or maybe a small office where I could ask for directions. What I found instead was something I was never supposed to see. The room was a study, but unlike any study I had ever encountered. The walls were lined with bookshelves that reached all the way to the ceiling, filled with leather-bound volumes that looked like they had not been touched in decades. A massive fireplace dominated one wall, with a fire crackling inside despite no one seeming to be tending to it. And in the center of the room, bent over an enormous antique desk covered in papers and photographs, was a man. He was tall, with dark hair that had just a touch of gray at the temples, and he was wearing a tuxedo that fit him so perfectly it looked like it had been sewn directly onto his body. His face was angular, almost severe, with sharp cheekbones and a jaw that looked like it had been carved from stone. But it was his eyes that stopped me cold. When he looked up and saw me standing in the doorway, his eyes were the color of a winter storm, gray with flecks of blue, and they held an intensity that made me forget how to breathe. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I stood there, frozen, my hand still on the door handle, my heart pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it across the room. He straightened slowly, his eyes never leaving my face, and I watched something shift in his expression. It went from surprise to calculation to something I could not quite identify. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and measured, with just a hint of an accent I could not place. "You should not have seen this." The words hung in the air between us like a threat, but there was something else in his tone that contradicted the warning, something almost like curiosity. I started to apologize, to explain that I was lost, that I was just looking for the coat check, that I would leave immediately and pretend I had never been here. But before I could get any words out, he said something that changed everything. "Come in." I should have run. Every instinct I had developed over 34 years of surviving in a world that was not designed for people like me screamed at me to turn around and get as far away from this room as possible. But something about the way he said it, or maybe something about the papers I could see spread across his desk covered in photographs that looked important, made me step forward instead. He closed the door behind me with a soft click that sounded much louder than it should have, and I realized that I was now alone in a hidden room with a stranger during a party where no one knew where I was. Smart choice, Eleanor. I was about to ask how he knew my name when I remembered the small name tag pinned to my borrowed dress. Event staff were required to wear identification at all times, but the way he said my name, like he was tasting it, testing it, made me wonder if he had known it before he read it off the tag. "What is this place?" I heard myself ask, even though I knew I should not be asking questions. I should be apologizing and leaving and finding Martin his stupid glasses and going back to being invisible. He tilted his head slightly, studying me like I was an interesting puzzle he was trying to solve. This is where secrets come to be protected. Or exposed. The answer made no sense and perfect sense at the same time. I looked around the room more carefully now, taking in details I had missed in my initial shock. The papers on the desk were not just random documents. They were legal filings, financial statements, and photographs of people I recognized. Politicians, celebrities, business leaders. Some of them were at the gala right now, laughing and drinking champagne in the ballroom a few hundred feet away. "You are a lawyer," I said, the realization clicking into place. "My boss mentioned there would be someone here tonight handling sensitive matters for the Sinclair Foundation." The man smiled, but it was not a warm smile. It was the kind of smile a chess player might give when their opponent makes an unexpected move. Interesting deduction, but not entirely accurate. He moved around the desk toward me, and I instinctively took a step back. He stopped when he saw my reaction, raising his hands slightly in a gesture of peace. "I am not going to hurt you, Eleanor. In fact, I think you might be exactly what I have been looking for." That was possibly the most terrifying thing he could have said. "What does that mean?" I demanded, finding some courage from somewhere deep inside myself. "And who are you?" "My name is Alexander Vance," he said, like that was supposed to mean something. When he saw that it did not register with me, something like genuine amusement crossed his face. "You really do not know who I am." "No," I admitted. "Should I?"
Most people in that ballroom would give significant amounts of money just to have a 5-minute conversation with me. I'm one of the 3 people who actually control the Sinclair Foundation. The other 2 are currently in the ballroom, completely unaware that their secrets are about to be exposed. The weight of his words settled over me like a heavy blanket. I suddenly understood that I had not just stumbled into a private study, I had walked straight into the middle of something massive, something that involved the kind of money and power that people like me usually only read about in newspapers.
"What kind of secrets?" I whispered, even though part of me did not want to know. He gestured toward the desk. "Come look." I should have said no. I should have insisted that he let me leave, that I had nothing to do with whatever was happening here, that I was just an assistant looking for a pair of reading glasses. But curiosity has always been my weakness, the thing that gets me into trouble, the thing that has also occasionally saved my life. I walked toward the desk and looked down at the papers spread across its surface. What I saw made my blood run cold. There were photographs of construction sites, but not the kind you would see in a normal real estate development. These showed buildings that were clearly substandard, walls that were crumbling even as they were being built, foundations that looked like they would collapse in a strong wind. There were financial documents showing money being transferred to offshore accounts, with names I recognized attached to them. And there were photographs of children, hundreds of children, in what looked like a school building, a building that, based on the other documents in front of me, had been built with the same substandard materials and methods as the other structures. The Sinclair Foundation has spent the last 15 years raising money for charitable construction projects around the world, Alexander explained, his voice cold with barely contained anger. Schools for underprivileged children in developing countries, hospitals in remote communities, housing for refugees. Noble work on paper. And in reality, I asked, already knowing the answer. In reality, my 2 partners have been stealing 70% of every donation, using substandard materials for the remaining 30% and pocketing the difference. Those schools you see in the photographs, they are death traps. One has already collapsed. 47 children were killed. The world does not know about it yet because my partners have paid a lot of money to keep it quiet. I felt sick to my stomach. I looked at the photographs of those children, their faces bright and hopeful, completely unaware that the building they went to every day to learn and grow was built with corruption and greed. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "You do not even know me." I looked up from the desk and found him watching me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. "Because I have been searching for someone exactly like you for months," he said. "Someone who has access to the legal community but is not corrupted by it. Someone who is overlooked and underestimated, who can move through certain circles without attracting attention. Someone who has nothing to lose and everything to gain." "I am an executive assistant," I said flatly. "I fetch coffee and make copies and organize calendars. I do not expose international charitable fraud." He smiled that calculating smile again. "Not yet." The next several minutes felt like a dream, the kind where everything happens too fast, but also in slow motion at the same time. Alexander Vance explained that he had been gathering evidence against his partners for nearly 2 years, but he needed help from inside the legal world to make sure the case was ironclad. He needed someone who could access certain documents, observe certain meetings, report certain conversations, someone invisible. "Why would I do this?" I asked when he finished. "Why would I risk everything, my job, my reputation, possibly my safety, for people I have never met in countries I have never visited?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small photograph, sliding it across the desk toward me. The image showed a young girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old, with dark curly hair and a gap-toothed smile. She was holding up a book triumphantly, like she had just won a prize. "Her name was Maria," Alexander said quietly. "She was in the school in Guatemala that collapsed. She wanted to be a doctor when she grew up. Her mother worked 3 jobs to keep her in that school because she believed education was the only way out of poverty. Maria died on a Tuesday afternoon when the 2nd floor gave way during an earthquake that should not have brought down a properly constructed building."
I stared at that photograph for a long time. Maria looked a little bit like my niece, the same hopeful expression, the same bright eyes full of dreams and possibilities. And now she was gone, because some wealthy men in tuxedos had decided that her life was worth less than a few extra zeros in their bank accounts. "What do you need me to do?" I heard myself say. Alexander looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in those storm-colored eyes, something like respect, or maybe something more complicated. There was a noise in the hallway outside, footsteps approaching. Alexander moved quickly, gathering up the papers on the desk and sliding them into a hidden compartment behind one of the bookshelves. When he turned back to me, his demeanor had completely changed. He looked relaxed, casual, like we had just been having a pleasant conversation about the weather. "If anyone asks, we were discussing your employer's interest in becoming a foundation donor."
You got lost looking for the restroom, and I was giving you directions. He pressed a small card into my hand just as the door began to open. I glanced down and saw only a phone number written in elegant script. "Call me when you are ready," he murmured. "And Eleanor, be careful who you trust." Then the door swung open and a woman entered. She was perhaps 50 years old, elegantly dressed in a silver gown that caught the light with every movement. Her face was beautiful in that preserved way that speaks of excellent surgeons and expensive treatments, but her eyes were cold, calculating, assessing me like a predator sizing up potential prey. "Alexander, darling," the woman said, her voice smooth as silk but with an edge underneath. "I have been looking everywhere for you. You're supposed to be mingling with the donors, not hiding in your little sanctuary. And who is this?" She turned those cold eyes on me, and I felt myself shrink under their gaze. "This is Eleanor," Alexander said easily. "She is with the Ashford legal team. Got a bit lost looking for the ladies' room, and I was helping her find her way." "I see." The woman's smile did not reach her eyes. "Well, Eleanor, the restrooms are down the main hallway, third door on your right. I suggest you hurry along. Your employer seems to be looking for you." I nodded and murmured some thanks, slipping past her and out the door as quickly as I could manage without actually running. But as I walked away, I could feel her eyes burning into my back, and I knew that she did not believe a word of the story we had told her. I found my way back to the ballroom eventually, retrieved Martin's reading glasses from a very annoyed coat check attendant, and delivered them to my boss just in time for his speech. He grabbed them from my hand without a thank you and proceeded to give a 20-minute talk about corporate responsibility that I could not focus on even a little bit. My mind was still in that study, still looking at those photographs, still hearing Alexander Vance's voice telling me about Maria and 46 other children who had died because powerful people valued money over human life. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I did my job, took my notes, smiled politely at people who looked through me like I was made of glass, but the small card in my pocket felt like it was burning a hole through my dress, and every time I saw the woman in silver moving through the crowd, my heart rate spiked with fear. Her name was Victoria Sinclair, I would learn later. She was one of the two partners Alexander was trying to expose, and somehow I knew even then that she had not believed our cover story for a second. That night after the gala ended and I took the subway back to my small apartment in Brooklyn, I sat on my bed and stared at that phone number for hours. I thought about Maria and the other children. I thought about all the donations from well-meaning people that had been stolen. I thought about the schools and hospitals that were still standing, waiting to collapse, putting thousands more lives at risk. And I thought about my own life, my small apartment with the leaky faucet, my job where I was invisible, my future that stretched out in front of me like an endless gray road leading nowhere. I had spent 34 years being careful, playing it safe, staying invisible, and what had it gotten me? A borrowed dress and a boss who did not know my last name? At 2 a.m, I picked up my phone and dialed the number on the card. He answered on the second ring. "I am ready," I said. "Good." His voice was warm in the darkness. "I will send a car for you tomorrow evening. There is much we need to discuss." I hung up and stared at the ceiling of my apartment, listening to the sounds of the city that never sleeps outside my window.
I had no idea what I was getting myself into, but for the first time in years, I felt something I had almost forgotten existed. I felt alive. The car that arrived at my building the next evening was a black Mercedes with tinted windows. The driver was a large man who looked like he could bench press my entire apartment building. He did not speak a single word during the 45-minute drive to wherever we were going, which gave me plenty of time to second-guess every decision I had made in the last 24 hours. We ended up at a townhouse in the Upper East Side, one of those impossibly elegant buildings that looked like it had been standing there since before my grandparents were born. Alexander was waiting for me in a room that was somehow both a library and a home office, with walls of books and a massive desk covered in more of those damning documents I had seen at the gala. For the next 3 hours, he explained everything. The Sinclair Foundation had been founded 30 years ago by Victoria's father, a genuinely philanthropic man who had made his fortune in shipping and wanted to give back to the world. When he died 15 years ago, control of the foundation passed to Victoria and her husband Roland, with Alexander joining as the third partner 5 years later. Alexander had been brought in because of his legal expertise and his connections in the international development community.
He had genuinely believed in the Foundation's mission and had helped expand their work to 23 countries on 4 continents. But about 3 years into his partnership, he had started noticing irregularities, funds that did not add up, contractors who seemed to be selected not for their qualifications, but for their willingness to cut corners, reports from field offices that contradicted the glossy presentations given to donors. When he started asking questions, Victoria and Roland had gotten defensive, then they had gotten threatening. They had made it clear that if he wanted to remain part of the foundation and remain healthy, he would stop digging. "I should have gone to the authorities then," Alexander admitted, his face shadowed with regret. "But I did not have enough evidence. It would have been my word against theirs, and they have connections everywhere. The police, the district attorney's office, even federal agencies. I needed to build an airtight case before I could do anything." So for the past 2 years, he had been quietly gathering evidence, documenting every questionable transaction, photographing every substandard construction site, collecting testimony from workers who had been paid to keep their mouths shut. The collapse of the school in Guatemala had been the tipping point. 47 children dead because the foundation had pocketed the money that should have gone toward proper earthquake reinforcement. The Guatemalan government had been paid handsomely to blame the deaths on an act of God, to accept that the building had been up to code, to close the investigation before it had really begun. But Alexander had found witnesses, workers who had been on the construction site and knew exactly what corners had been cut, local officials who had been bribed to approve substandard materials, a structural engineer who had warned the foundation about the risks months before the collapse and had been paid to change his report. The problem, Alexander explained, was getting all of this evidence into the right hands without Victoria and Roland finding out. They had eyes everywhere, in law enforcement, in the media, in the legal community. Any direct approach would be intercepted and buried before it could do any damage. "This is where you come in," he said, fixing me with those intense gray eyes. "Your firm handles several cases related to international charitable organizations. You have access to documents, to communications, to meetings that would help me identify who else is involved in this corruption. And most importantly, you are invisible." I sat there, processing everything he had told me, feeling the weight of it pressing down on me like a physical force. He was asking me to spy on my employer, to gather evidence that could take down some of the most powerful people in the city, to put myself at risk for the sake of children I had never met in countries I had never visited. "Why me?" I asked again. "There must be other people who could do this, people with more power, more resources, more protection." "Because those people can be bought," Alexander said simply, "or threatened, or compromised. You have nothing that Victoria and Roland want, which means you have nothing they can take away. And after watching you at the gala, I believe you have something else that is equally important." "What is that?" "Integrity." The word hung in the air between us.
I thought about all the times I had seen things at the law firm that made me uncomfortable. Senior partners overbilling clients, associates taking credit for work done by paralegals, cases that were settled not because they were unwinnable, but because a well-placed donation had made the problem go away. I had never said anything about any of it. I had kept my head down, done my job, stayed invisible, and maybe that made me part of the problem. "Okay," I said finally, "tell me what you need me to do." Over the next few weeks, Alexander trained me in techniques I never imagined I would learn: how to photograph documents without leaving any trace, how to access files that were supposed to be restricted, how to record conversations using equipment so small it was virtually undetectable, how to communicate using encrypted channels that Victoria's surveillance could not penetrate. It turned out that the Sinclair Foundation had tentacles reaching into dozens of organizations, including several law firms that handled their legal matters. My own firm, Ashford and Associates, was actually one of the key lawyers helping Victoria and Roland protect their fraudulent empire. The irony was not lost on me. For years, Martin had treated me like I was barely human, like my only purpose in life was to make his existence more convenient, and now I was in a position to bring down everything he had worked for. It felt like a kind of justice, even if that was not why I was doing it. The first few weeks of my undercover work were terrifying. Every time I accessed a file I was not supposed to see, my heart pounded so hard I thought my ribs would break. Every time I photographed a document, I imagined security guards bursting through the door to arrest me.
Every time I passed Victoria or Roland at one of the many events my job required me to attend, I was certain they could see the guilt written all over my face. But nothing happened. I was too invisible. Just as Alexander had predicted, no one noticed the executive assistant who lingered a little too long near the filing cabinets, who asked seemingly innocent questions about cases she should not have known about, who seemed to be everywhere without ever being anywhere important. The information I gathered was both better and worse than I had expected. Better because it provided exactly the kind of documentary evidence that Alexander needed to build his case. Worse because it revealed just how far the corruption extended. It was not just Victoria and Roland, it was dozens of people, lawyers and accountants and government officials and journalists, all taking money to look the other way while children died in collapsing buildings. About 6 weeks into my work, something unexpected happened. I was working late at the office, which was not unusual. Martin often left me with mountains of filing that had to be done before the morning. The building was mostly empty, just me and the cleaning crew and a few other late-night workers on different floors. I was in the file room photographing documents related to a Sinclair Foundation construction project in Honduras when I heard footsteps approaching. I barely had time to shove my phone into my pocket and pretend to be searching for a completely different file before the door opened. It was not a security guard, or Martin, or anyone else I had expected. It was Alexander. He was wearing a dark coat and a look of controlled urgency that immediately sent my adrenaline spiking. "We need to leave," he said quietly. "Now." "What is happening?" "Victoria knows. I do not know how, but she knows that someone has been accessing files they should not access. She has hired a private investigation team to identify the source of the leak. They will be here within the hour." My blood turned to ice. "How do you know this?" "I have my own sources," he said, already moving toward me, already reaching for my hand. "There is no time to explain. We need to get you out of the building and somewhere safe." The next few minutes were a blur of motion and fear. Alexander led me through back hallways and service corridors I had never known existed, past confused cleaning staff and down stairwells that smelled like dust and forgotten years. By the time we emerged onto a side street far from the main entrance, I was breathing so hard I thought I might pass out. A black car was waiting, a different one from before, and Alexander practically pushed me inside before climbing in after me. The driver pulled away smoothly, not fast enough to attract attention, but fast enough to put distance between us and the building as quickly as possible. "Where are we going?" I managed to ask when I had caught my breath enough to form words. "Somewhere they will not think to look," Alexander replied. He was on his phone, texting rapidly. "For now, you cannot go back to your apartment. You cannot contact anyone from your old life. Do you understand?"
I nodded, even though I did not really understand at all. Everything was happening too fast. Just that morning, I had been a normal executive assistant with a boring life and a leaky faucet in my bathroom. Now, I was a fugitive from powerful people who apparently wanted to silence me. The somewhere safe turned out to be a modest apartment in Queens, the kind of place that would never attract attention from anyone looking for people who associated with Alexander Vance. It was clean and comfortable, but anonymous, the kind of place 1,000 people just like me might live, without anyone ever remembering their faces. There is food in the refrigerator and everything you need for a few days, Alexander said as he showed me around. I will be back tomorrow to explain the next steps. In the meantime, do not go outside, do not answer the door, and do not contact anyone. He was almost at the door when I found my voice. Alexander, wait! He stopped, turning to look at me with those intense gray eyes. What happens now? I asked. To me, to the case, to everything we have been working on. Now we accelerate the timeline, he said. Victoria knows someone is watching, which means she will start destroying evidence and eliminating witnesses. We have maybe 2 weeks before everything we have gathered becomes useless. And after 2 weeks? After 2 weeks, either we expose the truth and bring down one of the most powerful criminal organizations in the country, or Victoria Sinclair buries everyone who knows too much, including you. He paused, his expression softening just slightly. Including us. Then he was gone, and I was alone in an apartment I had never seen before, in a neighborhood I barely knew, with nothing but a burner phone and the terrifying knowledge that powerful people wanted me silenced. I did not sleep that night. I sat by the window and watched the lights of Queens and thought about how quickly life can change. One wrong door at a party, and suddenly everything I thought I knew about myself was different.
I was not just an invisible assistant anymore. I was a witness, a threat, a target. And somehow, strangely, I was more myself than I had ever been before. Alexander came back the next afternoon with more information and a plan. The private investigators Victoria had hired were good, but they had not yet identified me as the source of the leak. They were focusing on higher-level employees, people who actually had security clearances and access to the files I had been photographing. It would not occur to them that an executive assistant could have pulled off such an extensive intelligence-gathering operation. We have a small window, Alexander explained. While they are looking in the wrong direction, we need to compile all of our evidence and get it to someone who can actually do something with it. I thought you said they had connections everywhere, I asked. Police, federal agencies, media? Is there anyone we can trust? There is one person, he said, a journalist named Sarah Chen who works for an investigative unit at the New York Times. She has been trying to write a story about charitable fraud for years, but has never been able to get solid evidence. More importantly, she cannot be bought. Victoria has tried. For the next 5 days, Alexander and I worked around the clock to organize everything we had collected. Photographs, documents, recorded conversations, witness testimonies. It was all there, a comprehensive picture of more than a decade of systematic fraud that had stolen hundreds of millions of dollars and cost dozens of lives. But as we worked, I noticed something changing between us. The formal distance that had marked our early interactions began to dissolve. We talked during our long working sessions, not just about the case, but about our lives, our pasts, our reasons for being the people we had become. Alexander told me about his childhood in a small village in Romania, how he had been the first person in his family to attend university, how he had spent 20 years building a career in international law before joining the Sinclair Foundation. He told me about his failed marriage to a woman who could not understand why he kept working 16-hour days for causes that would never make him rich. And he told me about the guilt he carried for not seeing the corruption sooner, for not acting faster, for every child who had died while he was gathering evidence. I told him about growing up in Brooklyn, about my father who had worked himself to death in a factory to give me and my siblings a chance at a better life.
I told him about dropping out of college when my mother got sick, about spending 5 years as a caregiver before she finally passed. I told him about building a career from nothing, about learning to be invisible because that was the only way to survive in a world that did not seem to have a place for people like me. Somewhere in those long nights of work and conversation, something shifted. I caught him looking at me sometimes with an expression I could not quite read, and I caught myself looking at him more often than I should have, noticing things like the way his hair fell across his forehead when he was concentrating, or the way his voice softened when he talked about the children the foundation was supposed to be helping. It was ridiculous, of course. We were in the middle of trying to take down a criminal empire. We were both probably going to end up dead or in prison or hiding for the rest of our lives. This was not the time for whatever feelings were developing between us. But feelings, as I was learning, do not care much about appropriate timing. On the 6th day, Alexander came to the apartment with news that made my blood freeze. "They found your apartment," he said. "Victoria's investigators. They went through everything. Eleanor, I am sorry, but they know who you are now." I sat down heavily on the couch, trying to process what this meant. My apartment, my clothes, my books, the photographs of my family, the small collection of things that had made up my life, all violated, searched, probably destroyed by now. "What happens now?" I managed to ask. "Now we have no more time to be careful," Alexander replied. He sat down next to me, close enough that I could feel the warmth of his body through our clothes. "I am moving the timeline up. We meet with Sarah Chen tomorrow. We give her everything, and then we disappear." Disappear where? I do not know yet, but Victoria Sinclair will not rest until she eliminates everyone who knows the truth. Once the story is published, we will be protected by public attention. Until then, we are both in danger. I looked at him, this man I had known for barely 2 months, but who somehow felt more real to me than anyone I had known my entire life. "Whatever happens," I said, "I want you to know that I do not regret any of this." He reached out and took my hand, his fingers warm and strong around mine. "Neither do I," he said quietly. The meeting with Sarah Chen took place at a neutral location, a small conference room in a hotel that specialized in discreet meetings for people who had reason to avoid being seen. Sarah was a tiny woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper mind.
She spent 4 hours going through our evidence, asking questions that made it clear she had been investigating the Sinclair Foundation long before we arrived with our treasure trove of proof. "This is everything I have been looking for," she said finally, her voice barely containing her excitement. "This is front-page material. This is Pulitzer material. This changes everything." "How long before you can publish?" Alexander asked. "A week? Maybe 2? I need to verify some of the sources, make sure the legal team signs off, protect myself from the inevitable lawsuit Victoria will file. But once this hits the press, there is no putting the genie back in the bottle." A week. That was all we had to survive. 1 week of hiding, of watching our backs, of waiting for Victoria Sinclair to find us. As it turned out, we would not have that long. We were leaving the hotel through a back entrance when I saw them, 2 men in dark suits moving through the lobby with the kind of focused determination that screamed either law enforcement or something much worse. One of them looked directly at me, and in that split second, I saw recognition flash across his face. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing Alexander's arm. We ran. Through the service corridor, past startled kitchen staff, out onto a loading dock where delivery trucks were parked in a neat row. Behind us, I could hear heavy footsteps and shouting voices. Alexander pulled me toward a black sedan that was parked at the far end of the dock. His driver, the same silent mountain of a man from before, was already starting the engine. We dove into the back seat just as the 2 men burst through the doors behind us. I heard something that sounded like gunshots, felt the car rock as bullets hit the rear panel, and then we were moving, accelerating through the city streets with a speed that should not have been possible in Manhattan traffic. "We made it," I breathed, still pressed against the seat from the force of our acceleration. "Not yet," Alexander said grimly.
He was on his phone, speaking rapidly in a language I did not recognize. When he hung up, his expression was darker than I had ever seen it. They have found my townhouse as well, and they have people watching every airport, train station, and bus terminal in the city. Victoria is not playing games anymore. So what do we do? He was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was heavy with something I could not identify. There is one place they will not think to look, but you are not going to like it. 3 hours later, we were at the Kensington estate, the same mansion where I had first walked through the wrong door, the same ballroom where I had been invisible, the same study where Alexander had first shown me photographs of dead children and offered me a chance to make my life mean something. "This is insane," I whispered as we slipped through a service entrance that Alexander somehow knew about. "Victoria practically owns this place. We are walking straight into the lion's den." "Which is exactly why she will not expect us to be here," Alexander replied. "Victoria has many properties, but the Kensington estate is symbolic. It was her father's favorite home. She would never believe anyone would be foolish enough to hide here." "I hope you are right," I said, but I was not at all confident that he was. The next 2 days were the most surreal of my entire life. We hid in a series of unused rooms in the east wing of the mansion, rooms that had been closed off decades ago and had not been touched since Victoria's father died. Alexander had discovered them years earlier, during his early days as a foundation partner, when he had spent time learning every corner of this massive estate. We survived on food that Alexander's driver smuggled in at night, slept in shifts so one of us could always keep watch, and waited for Sarah Chen to publish the story that would either save us or doom us. And somewhere in those 2 days of fear and waiting and intimate proximity, the thing that had been growing between us finally became impossible to ignore. It happened on the second night, when I woke from a nightmare to find Alexander watching me with an expression of such tenderness that it made my chest ache. He was sitting beside my makeshift bed, and when our eyes met, something passed between us that went beyond words. I do not know which of us moved first, but suddenly his lips were on mine, and I was clinging to him like he was the only solid thing in a world that had gone completely mad. We did not talk about what it meant or what would happen after. There was no after, not yet, not until we knew whether we would survive the next few days. But for those few hours in the darkness of that forgotten room, we allowed ourselves to feel something other than fear. On the morning of the third day, Alexander's phone buzzed with a message from Sarah Chen. It was the best and worst news possible. "The story is ready to publish," the message said, "but my sources tell me Victoria knows. She is coming for you." It was time to run again, but this time there was nowhere left to run. Victoria Sinclair arrived at the Kensington estate with an entourage of lawyers and security personnel that made it clear she was done pretending to operate within the bounds of civilized society. We watched from a hidden alcove as she strode through the main hall, barking orders at her people to search every room, every closet, every corner of the building. "There is no way out," I whispered, my heart pounding so hard I could barely hear my own words. "The building is completely surrounded." Alexander was calm, calmer than I could understand given the circumstances. "There is one way," he said, "but it requires perfect timing and a great deal of trust." "I trust you," I said, without hesitation. "Then listen carefully." What he proposed was dangerous, possibly suicidal, and absolutely the only chance we had. There was a hidden passage that led from the east wing to a utility building on the far side of the property. It had been built during the Prohibition era, when the original owners of the estate had needed a discreet way to transport contraband. Alexander had discovered it years ago, but had never imagined he would actually need to use it. The problem was that the entrance to the passage was in a room that was currently occupied by 2 of Victoria's security guards. We would have to neutralize them somehow, get into the passage, and make it to the other end before Victoria's people realized what had happened. And the other problem, Alexander added grimly, is that Sarah Chen is publishing her story in exactly 30 minutes. If we are not in a safe location by then, Victoria's people will have no reason to keep keep us alive. No witnesses, no problems. 30 minutes. It was not enough time. It was barely enough time to get from our current hiding spot to the room with the passage entrance. And yet, it was all the time we had. We moved through the mansion like ghosts, using Alexander's knowledge of the layout to avoid the security teams sweeping through each section. Twice, we had to press ourselves into shadows while guards passed within feet of our position. Once, I was so close to a man with a gun that I could have reached out and touched him. When we finally reached the room with the passage entrance, my nerves were stretched so tight I felt like I might snap in half. The two guards inside were both armed and alert. There was no way to get past them without being seen. Alexander handed me a small device, something that looked like a modified cell phone, but was clearly something else entirely. When I throw this, you have exactly 5 seconds to get to the panel behind the bookshelf and open the passage. I will handle the guards. You will be killed, I protested. Maybe, he admitted, but you will get away, and the story will be published, and Victoria will not win. I wanted to argue, to tell him that his life mattered too, that I had not come this far to watch him sacrifice himself for a cause that we had built together. But there was no time, and deep down, I knew he was right. This was the only way. I love you, I said, the words coming out before I could stop them, because if we were both about to die, I wanted him to know. I love you too, he replied. Then he threw the device, and everything happened at once. There was a flash of blinding light, and a sound like thunder compressed into a single instant. The guards shouted and stumbled, disoriented by whatever the device had done. Alexander charged into the room, moving with a speed and violence I had never seen from him, taking down one guard and grappling with the other. I ran for the bookshelf, my fingers finding the hidden mechanism he had described. The panel swung open to reveal a dark passage, stretching away into blackness. "Eleanor, go!" Alexander shouted. He was still fighting the second guard, who was bigger and stronger and beginning to recover from the initial shock. Behind them, I could hear more guards responding to the commotion, their footsteps thundering through the hallway. I could not leave him, but I could not stay. And in that moment, split between impossible choices, I saw Alexander make the decision for me. With a final, desperate effort, he broke free from the guard and sprinted toward the passage. He grabbed my hand as he ran past, pulling me into the darkness just as the first bullets began to fly. The panel closed behind us with a solid thunk, cutting off the sound of shouting and gunfire. But we could hear them trying to figure out how to open it, their frustrated voices muffled by centuries-old stone. "Run," Alexander panted. "They will find a way through eventually." We ran. The passage was narrow and dark, lit only by a small flashlight Alexander had somehow produced from his pocket. The walls were rough stone, scraping against our arms and shoulders as we squeezed through sections that had partially collapsed over the decades. I had no idea how long the passage was or where exactly it led, but I trusted Alexander to know the way. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, we emerged into a small stone building that smelled of earth and decay. A door led outside, and when Alexander pushed it open, I could see we were on the far edge of the estate, well beyond where Victoria's security cordon was focused. There was a car waiting, driven by yet another of Alexander's seemingly endless supply of loyal associates. We threw ourselves inside, and moments later we were speeding away from the Kensington estate, leaving behind everything that had happened there and hurtling toward an uncertain future. 10 minutes later, Sarah Chen's story went live on the New York Times website. I watched it load on Alexander's phone, saw the headline that would change everything. Sinclair Foundation fraud exposed, billions stolen, dozens dead. And beneath it, everything. Every piece of evidence we had gathered, every photograph, every document, every recorded confession. The world could see it now. The truth was out. "We did it," I breathed. "We actually did it." Alexander took my hand, his fingers intertwining with mine. He was bleeding from a cut on his forehead, and his suit was torn and covered in dust, but his eyes were bright with something that looked like hope. "Yes," he said, "we did." The aftermath was chaos. Within hours of the story publishing, federal agents were executing search warrants at Sinclair Foundation properties across the country. Victoria and Roland Sinclair were arrested trying to flee to a country without an extradition treaty. Dozens of their accomplices, including several lawyers from my former firm, were facing criminal charges. Martin Ashford, my perpetually dismissive boss, was among those arrested. I would be lying if I said I did not feel some satisfaction watching him being led away in handcuffs on the evening news. Alexander and I spent the next several months cooperating with federal investigators, providing testimony that would eventually help convict more than 40 people involved in the fraud. It was exhausting and sometimes frightening, but it was also the most meaningful work I had ever done in my life. And through it all, Alexander was beside me. We did not know what our future would look like. We did not know if the feelings we had developed in those intense, terrifying weeks would survive the transition to normal life, but we were willing to find out. A year later, I found myself standing at the site where that school in Guatemala used to stand. It had been rebuilt, this time with proper materials and engineering, funded by money recovered from the Sinclairs and their accomplices. Maria's mother was there, along with other parents who had lost children in the collapse. She hugged me and thanked me through tears, this woman I had never met, whose daughter's photograph had changed the entire course of my life. "I did not do this alone," I told her. Alexander was standing nearby, watching the ceremony with the same intense gray eyes that had first captured my attention in that study. He had dedicated himself to rebuilding everything the foundation had destroyed, using his legal expertise and his connections to ensure that the stolen money actually went where it was supposed to go. We were together now, officially, in a way that sometimes still surprised me. The invisible executive assistant and the powerful lawyer, brought together by a wrong door at a party and bound by shared purpose and something that felt a lot like love. That night, after the ceremony, we walked through the new schoolyard together. Children were playing on equipment that had been donated by various organizations, their laughter echoing across the valley like a promise of a better future. "Do you ever regret it?" Alexander asked. "Walking through that door at the gala, changing everything?" I thought about the question for a long moment. I thought about everything I had lost, my job, my apartment, my sense of safety, the life I had known for 34 years, gone in an instant. And I thought about everything I had gained, purpose, love, the knowledge that I had helped make the world a little bit better than I found it. "No," I said finally, "that wrong door was the best thing that ever happened to me." Alexander smiled, and it was a real smile, warm and genuine, and nothing like the calculating expression I remembered from our first meeting. He pulled me close, and we stood there together in the fading light, watching children play in a school that would not fall down, in a future that we had helped build. Sometimes I think about the person I used to be, the invisible woman who kept her head down and did not make waves, who spent her whole life being overlooked and underestimated and invisible. She was not a bad person, she was just surviving in the only way she knew how. But she was also not really living. She was existing, going through the motions, waiting for something to happen without ever having the courage to make it happen herself. That woman disappeared the moment she pushed open the wrong door at the Kensington Estate Gala. In her place was someone new, someone who had learned that the biggest risk in life is not taking any risks at all. Someone who had discovered that being invisible is only valuable if you choose when and how to become visible again. Someone who had found love in the most unexpected place and purpose in the most terrifying circumstances. Someone who was finally, fully, completely alive. If there is a lesson in my story, maybe it is this: the doors you are not supposed to open, the paths you are not supposed to take, the choices you are not supposed to make. Sometimes those are exactly the doors and paths and choices that lead you to the life you were always meant to live. You just have to be brave enough to step through. My name is Eleanor Price. I am no longer an executive assistant. I am no longer invisible. And this is the story of how one wrong door changed everything. But
that was just the beginning, because the thing about changing everything is that everything keeps changing. 6 months after Victoria and Roland Sinclair were convicted and sentenced to 25 years each in federal prison, I received a letter. It was handwritten, which was unusual in an age of emails and text messages, and it came with no return address. The postmark was from somewhere in Eastern Europe, a country I had never heard of. When I opened it, my blood went cold. "Dear Eleanor," the letter began, "you think you won. You think the story is over, but you have no idea what you have started. The Sinclairs were just the tip of the iceberg. There are others, bigger, more powerful, more dangerous, and they are watching you. If you want to survive what is coming, meet me at the place where it all began, 1 week from today, midnight. Come alone. Do not tell Alexander. A friend." I read the letter 3 times, my hands trembling. Then I burned it in the sink and watched the ashes wash down the drain. I told myself it was a hoax, someone playing a cruel joke, a copycat trying to capitalize on the publicity surrounding our case. I told myself to ignore it, to move on with my life, to focus on the future Alexander and I were building together. But I could not stop thinking about it. The place where it all began. That could only mean one thing: the Kensington estate, the study where I had first walked through the wrong door. And despite every logical argument I made to myself about why this was a terrible idea, despite knowing that I should at least tell Alexander about the letter, despite everything I had learned about the dangers of trusting strangers, on the appointed night I found myself driving through the darkness toward that massive mansion. Because that is who I am now. The woman who walks through doors she is not supposed to open. The woman who takes risks. The woman who cannot leave a mystery unsolved, even when solving it might cost her everything. The Kensington estate was dark when I arrived, abandoned since the scandal. Victoria's assets had been seized, and the property was tied up in legal proceedings that would probably take years to resolve. The front gates were locked, but I knew about the service entrance now. I knew about a lot of things I had not known a year ago. I made my way through the darkened hallways with only a small flashlight to guide me. Everything looked different at night. The paintings watching from the walls like disapproving ancestors, the shadows stretching in ways that seemed almost alive. When I reached the study where it had all started, the door was already open. A sliver of candlelight spilled out into the hallway. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room looked almost exactly as it had that night, except for the candles that now flickered on every surface. And there, sitting in the same chair where Alexander had once sat reviewing documents, was a woman I had never seen before. She was old, perhaps 80, with white hair pulled back in an elegant chignon and eyes that sparkled with intelligence and something else I could not quite identify. She was dressed in black, head to toe, like she was in mourning, or like she wanted to disappear into the shadows. "Eleanor Price," she said, her voice surprisingly strong for her apparent age. "You came." I stayed near the door, ready to run if necessary. "Who are you, and what do you want?" She smiled, and there was something eerily familiar about that smile, something that made my skin prickle with unease. "My name is Margaret Sinclair. I am Victoria's grandmother, and I want to tell you about the organization that the Sinclairs have been protecting for the past 100 years. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I thought about running, about getting as far away from this room and this woman and whatever new nightmare she was about to reveal. But I did not run, because running was what the old Eleanor would have done, the invisible one, the one who played it safe and stayed in the shadows and never made waves. Instead, I stepped fully into the room and closed the door behind me. "Tell me everything," I said, and she did. What Margaret Sinclair told me that night made the foundation fraud look like a children's game. She told me about an organization that had existed for more than 2 centuries, with tentacles reaching into governments and corporations and institutions all over the world.
She told me about a network of influence so vast and so hidden that most people would never believe it existed. And she told me about her own role in trying to expose it, a fight that had cost her her family, her fortune, and nearly her life. Victoria is not just a criminal, Margaret explained. She is a soldier in a war most people don't even know is being fought.
A war for control of the global economy, for access to resources, for the power to shape the future of humanity. The foundation fraud was never really about money. It was about maintaining their network of compromised officials and compliant corporations. When you exposed Victoria, you disrupted one small piece of a much larger machine. And now the people who run that machine are very, very angry. I listened in stunned silence as she laid out evidence even more damning than what Alexander and I had uncovered. Documents tracing the organization's activities back to the 19th century. Photographs of world leaders meeting in secret locations. Recordings of conversations that would topple governments if they were ever made public. "Why are you telling me this?" I finally asked. "Why me? Why now? Why not go to the authorities?" "Because the authorities are compromised," Margaret said simply. "I have tried. For 50 years I have tried, and everyone I have approached has either been bought, threatened, or eliminated. But you, Eleanor Price, you are different. You proved that when you took down Victoria." I shook my head, overwhelmed by what she was asking of me. "I am nobody. I am just an executive assistant who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time." "You are exactly what we need," Margaret replied. "Someone they are not watching. Someone who can move through the world without attracting attention. Someone who has already proven she has the courage to fight back." She stood and walked toward me, her movements surprisingly steady for someone her age. "I am dying," she said matter-of-factly. "Cancer. The doctors give me perhaps 6 months. I have spent my entire life trying to expose this organization, and I have failed. But perhaps I can help someone else succeed where I did not." She pressed a small key into my hand. "There is a safety deposit box in a bank in Geneva. This key opens it. Inside, you will find everything I have gathered over 50 years. Evidence, names, locations, connections. Enough to bring down an empire. But be warned, once you take this key, there is no going back. They will know, and they will come for you." I looked at the key in my palm. It was small, ordinary looking, nothing to suggest it could unlock secrets that might reshape the world. I thought about Alexander waiting for me at home, unaware of where I was or what I was doing. I thought about the life we had built together, the peace we had found after the chaos of the Sinclair investigation. I thought about walking away, handing the key back, telling Margaret Sinclair to find someone else to fight her impossible war. But I also thought about Maria, about the 47 children who had died because powerful people valued money over lives, about all the other injustices in the world that happened because ordinary people were too afraid to stand up, too invisible to be noticed, too careful to take risks. I closed my fingers around a key. "How do I start?" I asked. Margaret smiled, and this time I recognized why that smile looked so familiar. It was the same smile Alexander had given me on the night we first met. The smile of a chess player whose opponent had just made exactly the move they were hoping for. "You have already started," she said, "the moment you walked through that door." I should have been terrified. I probably was terrified, somewhere deep beneath the determination that had taken over my conscious mind. But mostly what I felt was the same thing I had felt a year ago when I first stepped into this room. That electric sense of being fully alive,
of standing at the edge of something enormous, of knowing that nothing would ever be the same. When I left the Kensington estate that night, the key was in my pocket and a new purpose was in my heart. I did not know what would happen next. I did not know if I would succeed or fail, live or die, change the world or be crushed by forces beyond my comprehension. But I knew one thing for certain. The invisible woman was gone, and whoever had taken her place was just getting started. This is not just my story anymore. This is a story about power and corruption and the ordinary people who refuse to look away. This is a story about doors that should not be opened and the courage it takes to open them anyway. This is a story about falling in love in the most impossible circumstances and finding purpose in the most unexpected places. And this story is far from over. But that, as they say, is a tale for another time. For now, I will leave you with this. If you ever find yourself at a party, lost and confused, staring at a door you probably should not open, take a breath. Remember that the biggest risk in life is not taking any risks at all, and push it open. You never know what might be waiting on the other side. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? I would love to know in the comments. If you enjoyed this story, please consider supporting me so I can keep creating more stories like this. Thank you so much for listening. On the screen, you can see 2 other stories that I think you will love. There is so much more on my channel. Do not forget to subscribe. I will see you in the next story. With love and respect.